Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my Am Reading update for the end of June 2019 and the beginning of July. I kind of fell off the wagon of Friday Reads updates recently. I was doing really well for most of June. I had 3 books, my final BookTube prize books that I wanted to finish in a row week by week for the first 3 weeks, and on the weekends I was able to squeeze in some smaller books. And then the end of the month came, and I did turn a bit to some writing goals, and things took slower just overall. Just the other day I finally got up my newsletter for June. I put up a literary newsletter once a month where I have excerpts from my Goodreads reviews of what I've read that month. I have a book picture and a book meme and a TBR and things like that, so I'll link that down below. But I also thought I'd give some quick thoughts about the books I hadn't talked about yet on any of my Friday Reads that I finished last month, starting with The Turner House by Angela Flournoy, which I believe really became my favorite book of the month. It was worth the hype from a couple of years ago in the literary fiction circles. It's a family saga about the Turner family in Detroit in 2008. Their matriarch is sick, the house is in disrepair in a, rundown neighborhood. They owe more on it than they'll ever get, and the children, of which there are 13 Turner children, have to come together to decide what to do about this house. So there's a bit about real estate and history, but really it's the story of a couple of characters within this world, particularly of the oldest and the youngest siblings, which with 13 people, or I guess technically 11 people between them, they're a generation apart, and there's a lot of emphasis put on the fact that they had very different experiences growing up. But I felt like the most powerful stuff was what they were dealing with in the present. Cha-Cha was the older sibling, and he was seeing a haint, a Southern-style ghost, and it sort of wove into some feelings and resentments that he'd had throughout his life. And then Leela, the youngest, had just gotten evicted from her home. She has a gambling addiction, and in fact for a while she secretly moves back into the family home. I just thought Flournoy had a wonderful voice. The characters were very compelling. There was a huge family tree with more people on it than ever got into the book, but I never really had any trouble keeping up with any of the main characters. I'd flip through sometimes when a smaller character would come in, but for the most part the people this story was about were very there on the page. It was a nice way to end the month. Well, kinda. I guess I didn't really end my month there. I also finished an audiobook, Bright We Burn by Kiersten, which is the last in her Conqueror Saga series. It's a YA alternative fantasy history series imagining Vlad the Impaler as a teenage girl. I think despite that premise, White had a nice grasp on history and making it accessible and entertaining. But perhaps the strongest part is, despite the fact that, like a lot of YA relationships, especially romance, loom large, she's not... she's more realist about the dangers of too much passion, especially coupled with the desire for conquest, and we're dealing with these larger-than-life characters like the real Sultan Mehmed and, Lada/Vlad, and also Lada's brother Radu, who gave a really nice counterbalance about someone who wanted a quieter life and a desire for family and stability despite a turbulent upbringing. I really like what she had to say overall in this series about power and relationships, and I do think I viewed this final installment a bit through the lens of the final season of Game of Thrones. There's some similarities, I think, between Lada and Daenerys. This wasn't my favorite of the 3 books. I think it began slowly, too slowly, and there were some convenient things at the end, but overall I was very impressed and I really enjoyed the series. And finally, getting back to sweeping literary fiction, I have Free Food for Millionaires by Min Jin Lee. This is her first novel that she published a little over 10 years ago, and this was a reprint that came out shortly before Pachinko. I really like this one as well. This is a fascinating sweep of what it was like for largely Korean community living in Manhattan in the end of the 20th century. We're primarily following Casey Han, who graduates from Princeton and is trying to get on her feet and get a really cushy job, although she turns down law school, which disappoints her parents, who are incredibly I guess, lower to middle class. She decides she wants to go into something a little more lucrative, perhaps not as nourishing in the end. But some of the fascinating things in here are about this culture of business and banking and finance, and having to build yourself up to look more well off than you are, and the idea of sort of credit card impoverishment, that, you know, Casey is someone who understands the positives of looking good, but she doesn't actually have the money that she's spending to do it. But there's so much else going on too. There's relationships, there's sexuality, there's friendships and romance, and we're following other Korean and other non-Korean characters all around as well. I think overall it might have been a little too long. There might have been too many subplots, although I was, for the most part, incredibly engrossed in everything going on in this. It's just a really unique set of characters and circumstances. At least I hadn't read about this type of scenario before, and I liked it. And I think Casey in particular is a character who will really stick in my head as someone who's driven and has sort of a sense of both the feminine and the masculine, because she understands the power of fashion, but she is also, you know, go and do or die in this business world. She was definitely the best part of this. Good main character. Okay, so that was June, and so far in July I'm doing okay. I finished another audiobook, another YA fantasy, The Wicked Saints by Emily Duncan. I didn't like this one as much. I was hoping for better. This is a fantasy novel based on Slavic history and culture. There's an 100-year war between two neighboring countries. One of them is based off of Eastern Orthodoxy. I would guess there's a church and adherence to gods, and the other one is anti-gods. Both of these groups use magic, but the, you know, heretical group, you know, says magic comes from us, and the godly group says magic comes from the gods. And anyway, there's, you know, just violence and violence and violence, and we're following the main character, who's basically the hero, who is this cleric with patronage from more of this polytheistic pantheon of gods than usual, so she has a lot of clout with them and a lot of power, and she's been training, and at the beginning of the book she's found out by her enemies and her monastery's attacked, and then she goes on a quest with some newfound friends to end this war. We also follow the prince from the other side, and an elusive, dangerous other character. I like the world building. I like how Duncan put in how magic works, and peppered the story with questions about where magic comes from and what deities want and what power they actually have. But the characters were really flat. I wasn't invested much at all in the plot. I also wasn't incredibly impressed with the audiobook because I listened to it on there. So I don't think I'll be continuing with that series. But here's a series I am continuing with, or at least Min Jin Lee calls it a series or connected, but anyway, I'm talking about Pachinko. I'm finally reading Pachinko. I just started it. This has been very famous. I've been intrigued. In fact, I got this signed from the author last year at the National Book Festival. Although another main reason I'm reading it now is because of a personal reading goal to read the winners of the Reading Women Awards from the Reading Women podcast. How many times can I say reading? Anyway, this is also sprawling, although technically it's shorter than Free Food for Millionaires, and already I think I understand this better because this is going to take place over several generations rather than 4 years in the 90s. Although there is another similarity I've also found, that one of the characters who interacts with the main character so far is a broker. Just as powerful, although perhaps not as fun as the ones in the other book. But I'm looking forward to keeping up with this, though I'm restricting it so far to my commute to and from work, because I also have this book on the docket. And if I thought anything else I had to read so far was long, this one's 800 pages, and it's due back to the library much sooner than I would hope. This is The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon, and it is a sprawling epic fantasy, adult style, and a new release. I'm trying to get in some new releases here so I can vote next year in next year's BookTube SFF Awards. This I know is based in part on St. George and the Dragon, which, fun fact, my first novel that I wrote at 11 years old, it was 82 handwritten pages, called Captured by Fate, was also based on St. George and the Dragon, or at least the picture book that I had of it. I'll read more from the flap. A world divided, a queendom without an heir, an ancient enemy awakens. The house of Baronthnet has ruled Innis for 1,000 years. Still unwed, Queen Sabran, the Ninth, must conceive a daughter to protect her realm from destruction, but assassins are getting closer to her door. Iad Dorian is an outsider at court. Though she has risen to the position of lady-in-waiting, she is loyal to a hidden society of mages. Iad keeps a watchful eye on Sabran, secretly protecting her with forbidden magic. Across the dark sea, Tane has trained all her life to be a dragon rider, but is forced to make a choice that could see her life unravel. Meanwhile, the divided East and West refuse to parley, and forces of chaos are rising from their sleep. Oh, so this is East versus West. I know there's different opinions on the nature of dragons for both sides of this worldly conflict I think we're going to get into. Still thinking of Game of Thrones a bit in terms of sprawling epic fantasy and dragons. But I think I gotta put myself on a strict reading schedule to try to get through this in time. So, yeah. I don't think I can cart it to and from work, or at least it'd be silly to, as this thing is. But hoping to read it at night when I get home. And I think I'm gonna disappear into this, and disappear into a reading cave for a bit, and check back here when I'm done. So that about covers it for me now. I seem to be in a problematic loop, it feels like, because what slowed me down at the end of last month and the beginning of this month is all of these chunkers, but I keep picking them up. I'd like to be able to update on BookTube regularly and, of course, keep ticking books off of my TBR, but sometimes I guess I should go for a chunky book. I don't want to miss out just because they take longer to read. So here's to hoping for good things. At least most of the reading has been really good so far. I hope most of your reading this summer has been as well. So thanks so much for watching, everybody, and I'll see you next time.